Star Ocean Till the End of Time is an important game for me. It was one of the first role-playing games I ever got into or even finished. I remember spending countless hours in the game's post-story dungeons and looking up guides online for item creation. I don't know how popular Star Ocean 3 even is anymore. While it's loved for what it does, I think it was the moment where fan opinion began to split on the series. Regardless, I'm not interested in the public opinion of Star Ocean 3, but I am interested in seeing how it holds up in 2018. And with the HD re-release last year, I felt it was the perfect time to revisit one of my favorite games on the PS2. One reason I was drawn into Star Ocean 3 and the series is the combination of science fiction and fantasy. We get to go to places that you wouldn't expect to in an RPG. One minute you're flying on a spaceship in the midst of a galactic war, and the next you're among a civilization of swords and magic, flinging fireballs and cutting down foes. With this combination of genres, it might seem that the narrative and gameplay would end up clashing. But it doesn't. The game knows how to separate the two. The majority of your time will be spent on underdeveloped planets, bearing witness to different civilizations and cultures that contrast with what we, as the player, already know. We know about Earth, even if it's hundreds of years in the future. Science fiction allows us to project our understanding of what we know into a realm that isn't necessarily impossible, but unrealized. The best science fiction, after all, is based in reality. Fantasy, on the other hand, allows the player to indulge in the impossible. It's cool when the moments of sci-fi kick in, and you're beamed up from the planet in a sudden change of narrative and setting. It's equally as cool to first set foot in Aquios, the capital city of a nation ruled in large by magic-casting woman warriors. And it's not as though this feels like an afterthought either. The game documents history, people of interest alive, dead, or not even in the game, locations both visitable or entirely absent, and so on. Everything you may have wanted to know about the game's locations and societies is right there at your fingertips. It's entirely optional, but to ignore the amount of world building put into Star Ocean 3 would be a disservice. Anyway, our hero, Fate Line God, after getting mixed up in a battle between the Vendini and the Federation, lands on an underdeveloped planet and starts getting into fights with tiny slimes and rich, wealthy men in his beach clothes. And you know what? Despite all of that sounding silly, it's actually kind of refreshing. I mean, Fate isn't some warrior protagonist who has been studying the blade for years until finally setting out on adventure. He's a 19-year-old college student on vacation with his family. He learns how to fight based off of the games he plays in augmented reality. Naturally, there's more to it than that as the story goes on, but it's nice to see a JRPG protagonist who is more or less like you and me. What Fate may lack in brute strength, he makes up for in strength of character. He can struggle under emotional pressure, but for the most part he remains analytical and fearless under danger. When presented with complex dilemmas of moral or difficult nature, he pauses and takes the time to study the best outcome for all parties involved. Of course, no decision can easily solve the issues he faces, and this is where Fate's character can really shine.
No!
You know, except for some parts. He's not the best JRPG character ever made, but he's not a terrible one either. So what about the rest of the cast? For the most part, they're all interesting characters with a few exceptions. Cliff is a brute who's a lot more clever than he lets on. Maria is stoic, but a little cold. Nell first appears to use the party as a means to an end, but warms up and shows heart when it matters most. It's fun to learn about them, and even more so to play them. The majority of them aren't essential to the story, so they are relegated to the background in cutscenes or may not show up at all. Some of them aren't even permanent. During your time on Elicor 2, where most of the game takes place, characters join and leave your party on a temporary basis. This is so when the final story acts begin to take place and you return to previously visited locations, you can check up on old friends and decide who to recruit to your party for good. Then how does the game involve these characters in the narrative? Well, it does so in a system called private actions. Private actions are basically small events that occur during the course of a game, where you interact with the characters and NPCs. Sometimes the interactions reveal more backstory about the world, or certain people if the PA has to do with them. There's no doubt in my mind that on my first playthrough years ago I missed almost every private action in the game. For the purposes of this playthrough, I used a guide to see as many as I could, and if this guidebook that I'm using is correct, there are a total of 60 of these events. Some of them automatically happen as part of the main story, while others you have to seek out in between the major story events. It provides a good incentive to not skip through dialogue, and to explore the world during your downtime. For instance, in this PA with Albel roughly halfway through the game, he asks if Fate hates him for the things he's done. If you say no, Albel will like you more and will actually rejoin your party as a permanent member in a later scene. If you say yes, he does not join your party, he does not show up in that scene, and you lose favor with him. And the other party members will still respond positively or negatively even if they aren't part of the scene. This event is entirely optional. It only occurs if you rest at the inn in a certain town at a specific time in the story. Sometimes, PAs have nothing to do with your characters. Like in this particular dungeon, to progress you must fetch water for a fairy. There are 3 kinds of water, and only one will allow you to progress. Bring back the wrong kind, and your party will dislike fate. These kinds of interactions happen everywhere. It makes it so the choices in conversation actually matter, instead of blindly picking options on a whim. Why is this important in the long run? At the end of the game, Fate will get an ending scene with the character that likes him most, or a scene alone if nobody likes him enough. It's small and the scene is more fluff than anything, but it's fun to try and earn the ending with the character you like. In my playthrough for this video, I wanted to get the ending with Nell, so I chose options that would get me points with her. Something I noticed while playing is that PAs start to thin out considerably. The first couple hours of the game are filled with PAs that are integrated into the story. Almost every decision you make does something to affect the party's disposition. Around the midway point of the game, however, far fewer of these events are tied to progression. They become entirely missable and involve backtracking where you might not otherwise think to do so. While it rewards the patient, explorative player, someone who isn't inclined to do so will miss out. Let's talk about the core gameplay. As such in a JRPG, you'll be running between towns and dungeons on your way through story quests, entering battles, leveling up, and so on. Combat works well and remains interesting throughout the game, as you can change between any of the playable characters on the fly, each with entirely different playstyles. Don't like how Fate feels? Try out Nell, who uses a mix of acrobatics and magic, or Maria, who is essentially a glass cannon that can chain cancel indefinitely. No, seriously, once you get Maria, you can assign the same move to all the buttons and spam forever for insane damage. Star Ocean 3 also has an invention system. After you meet Welch and gain the ability to use workshops, you can assign characters to invent items. Every character has different stats for each of the crafting disciplines. Cliff is really good at engineering. Sophia excels at cooking. You place your characters on an invention line, assign an amount of money to spend, and go. Of course, it's a little more complicated than that. Certain characters can only invent specific items, and each character adds or detracts from the price required. Now, I used a guide to determine everything, but if you're a first-time player going blind, you may not have any idea about this. It becomes a costly test and trial and error. In addition to the main cast, there are inventors all across the world that are recruitable, given you have the money or the items that they want. Some will straight up ask for cash, and some require rare items found through exploration or crafting. It's impossible to tell who wants what though, unless you find each individual inventor and talk to them. The ones who want items give extremely vague hints as to what you need, so good luck if you aren't using a guide. Since I was using a guide, however, I procured the proper items, made enough money, and created a monopoly over invention throughout the planet. I ruled the streets, and everyone worked for me. It's an easy life when you're on top, isn't it? So you've invented some items. What do you do with them? Well, you patent them, of course. Once you create an item, and you're the first to do so, you can go to the invention menu and ask Welch to rank your creations. The items then go to stores for a fraction of their price for you to buy, and you receive money at increments based off of your creations. It's such a cool feature that brings life to the world. It makes it feel like you've actually impacted it in some way. Going to the local outfitter and seeing them stocked up on your works is an awesome feeling. Okay, so there's one thing left I want to talk about, and it's absolutely the most divisive part of Star Ocean 3, the plot twist. So most people hate it. They feel it's a cop-out, it ruins the mythos of the Star Ocean series, and renders everything meaningless. I don't think I agree, but I do think it has some issues that need to be addressed. And there are big spoilers ahead, by the way. Fate and the party return to space after the death of his father, who gives him a last message to go to the lab on Moonbase. On Moonbase, the party learns of the existence of the fourth dimension, and beings that live there who are coming to destroy the galaxy. Fate, Sophia, and Maria were genetically modified as children to hold special powers to combat these beings, and save everyone. Standard JRPG stuff. What comes next, however, changes everything. The party enters 4D space and learns that the Milky Way galaxy is part of a simulation called the Eternal Sphere. The Eternal Sphere is, in essence, an MMO. It's a video game. Fate and his companions and everyone he has ever known are programs inside the Eternal Sphere. The creator, Luther, has determined that the programs inside have advanced too far and must be erased. Now, there are actually some interesting aspects to this. Luther is an egotistical sociopath. He believes his creations cannot surpass him and have to be destroyed in the event that they do. The big bad guy isn't some demon or god or whatever a JRPG final boss trope usually is. It's a man with an ego. I mean, he sits in a massive tower inside his own program. He thinks of himself as a god to this universe he's created, and can't fathom the idea that they have gained similar sentience to rival his own. The final confrontation is a battle to prove that the existence of the people of the Eternal Sphere is justified. It's a climactic encounter enhanced by the fact that the opponent in front of you is just a frightened man. You have made it to this point. You beat the odds and have come farther than he had ever imagined. He's cornered. Here's where it gets a bit stupid. After the battle, the Eternal Sphere is seemingly erased. But when Fate wakes up to all of his friends standing over him, and they wax philosophical for a bit before the credits roll, it's in that moment that I realize that this game is unfit to handle the questions it poses. The philosophy of existence and consciousness is a really heavy topic, and the game tries to weigh in on it with underwhelming results. Why, if the universe is erased, do they still exist? They explain that perhaps their consciousness has evolved to a point where it goes beyond the parameters of the program and cannot be deleted. Maybe, in this final scene, everyone is already dead. Maybe Maria's power of alteration did something, and now they are okay. I have no idea. It's okay to discuss themes like this in a video game. In fact, it's encouraged. A game that keeps the player thinking after it ends is at the very least interesting. I'm not mad about the twist in Star Ocean 3, I'm disappointed that the end result makes no sense. In a moment where it's okay to leave questions unanswered and be ambiguous, the story instead tries to tie everything together. The game pushes that happy ending. Instead of leaving the player with thoughtful, poignant questions, it leaves behind unfulfilling answers. In the end, Star Ocean 3 is still very much worth playing. It's an incredibly enjoyable RPG even today. Honestly, I thought I'd come out of this a lot less positive, having realized that nostalgia has ruled my opinion all these years. I'm happy to say that this isn't the case.